On.
Oh, hi, Adam. Good to see everyone joining us tonight.
Hi.
Okay, I think those who are in the waiting room have now all managed to join. And since we only have an hour, I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the 35th Solidarity session. These all began at the beginning of the pandemic, and they were such a good way to get together and talk about the big issues of our time. We've continued it. And I would like to start, well, actually, quick housekeeping. You're very welcome to turn on your cameras unless you are somehow indisposed, but it is nice to see people if you're able to turn your cameras on, and then just keep your sound off, of course, unless you are wanting to have a chat. Hey, Bridie, good to see you. Good to see everyone, Shell. Hi, Amy, I see you there, and Josh. So anyway, I'm going to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you all from the unceded lands of the Jajawarang, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also to all First Peoples who are joining us here tonight. And I would encourage everyone to please share in the chat whose country you're joining from. It's always great to see the diversity of places people are coming from in these sessions. I'm going to also start by saying that we being the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance, stand in solidarity with the oppressed and with victims of historic and ongoing injustice, and today especially with the Palestinian people. We also strongly condemn the Israeli genocide in Gaza, and we extend our solidarity to all people suffering under violence and authoritarian and illegitimate states, including the peoples of Syria, Venezuela, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Haiti, Sudan, Niger, Myanmar, and Afghanistan, and also with Indigenous peoples in all settler colonial states, including Australia. Until all people are free of tyranny and oppression, none of us are free. And not only would we make that statement of solidarity in any session, especially at the current time, we make it because we're talking about land tonight, and a really important part of that is whose land are we on, acknowledging whose land we're on and whether it was ceded or not, depending on where you're joining from, and that the struggles for land continue everywhere, including here in Australia. This is going to be one of two sessions on land. In this one, we're going to share what's known about the loss of access to and tenure on land for First Peoples, smallholders, and local communities. And we're also going to share some actions that we know are being taken to address the issue. And in the second solidarity session, we will explore in greater detail the development of an agrarian trust by AFSA and some of our allies, and some of the other kind of interesting things that people are looking at, like farm covenants to protect important agricultural land. And now I'm going to dive I'm going to speak just for a bit to set a scene. And a lot of what I'm going to share has come from a report from IPES Food, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. It came out quite recently, called Land Squeeze. And so what I thought I'd do is give it's a really excellent synopsis of what are the problems in terms of the land squeeze happening here and all around the world. And then once I've shared some of the key things from that report, I'll open it up for us to discuss together and share knowledge about what we know is happening around us in the places where we are, and what people are doing about it. And so I want to start with a stat I still find really shocking from the EPES report, which is that 1% of the world's largest farms operate on 70% of the world's farmland. Like, I find that, I've heard a lot of bad stats in my years as an activist, but I find that one really shocking, actually, that 1% of the farms operate on 70% of the farm's land. You've probably heard the one that we recite a lot, that 70% of the world's food is produced by smallholders, and actually only 30% of it is produced by the industrial food machine. In fact, most of what is produced by the industrial food machine is not producing food. It's producing food-like products and ingredients for ultra-processed foods or feed for animals or biofuels. A lot of it is not actually food. In Australia, another stat is that 14% of farmers in this country enjoy 59% of the market value of what's sold. And the thing that not only is that, I think, a really telling stat about the inequities in our system and who owns the land. In the context of a country that exports 72% of what is produced, if 14% of them are enjoying 59% of the value, I would wager to bet that the majority of that 59% is for export. So it's also not even feeding Australian communities. It's feeding middle-class societies overseas. As we know, we don't feed the poor or the hungry around the world. We actually we feed middle-class societies. And so we're suffering here and elsewhere around the world from an increasingly consolidated and export-focused industrial food system. There's actually really interesting research being done by Ben Trethui, who's on our national committee, who couldn't join us tonight because he's finishing a thesis actually at the moment. But he is working on some of the things about representations of farmers in Australia, and some of his research that he's uncovering has mirrored things I found when I just finished in the PhD I just finished about the origin stories of our representational bodies, you know, being from big pastoralist farmers back in the 1800s, starting these organizations to advocate for the export orientation and for them to continue to consolidate more holdings of the land, of the limited land available. So it's a really old story in this country of who controls land and what they're doing to continue to control it. And they're not without power, these people. But now it's not just the problem of a few wealthy farmers and the increase in corporate industrial farms, but land's now being treated increasingly as a liquid, fungible asset. And it's in the hands of more and more financial actors rather than farmers. So where we started with a very long problem of large holdings controlling too much of food production in this country, we are now reaching a point where food isn't even being produced on much of this land anymore. And you've seen the increase in environmental markets. So biodiversity markets are the new one, carbon markets are the older one, treating all of those things as fungible assets, as though you can swap a koala for a kangaroo, which of course is nonsense. And those activities, which I'll talk about more in just a second, are reducing all of our ability to get onto land or stay on land, as probably, actually, there are a number of smallholders here I know who are suffering from exactly these things. So some of the key takeaways from that EPES report, which Jess has put into the chat, and I really strongly recommend that you have a look at the report. So the first thing they talk about is land grabbing 2.0. We're in the latest round of land grabbing. Sometimes in Australia, we forget that land grabbing happens here as well. And it's not just in the global south or majority world, which is where quite a lot of it is taking place. But we have governments in adopting pro-investor policies, which we know they've done for a long time anyway. We have water and resource grabs happening increasingly. We have financialized land markets and speculation, as I already mentioned. Digitizing land registers, which are feeding financial markets with data. That's a really important one that I don't think is well understood here. It's better understood in other parts of the food sovereignty movement in other parts of the world. But every time we're handing over data in like farming apps or through surveys and things, there's the potential and often the reality that data is then taken and shared with big agribusiness firms, basically, who are doing spatial mapping to see what if you give them all your soil data, your rainfall data, and then match that with production, increases in yield, they're getting amazing maps out of it to see where to invest for their future as climate change reduces the ability to grow food. So the digitalization of agriculture and the collection of data is a increasingly huge risk to our potential to grow food. So be careful with your data, I guess, is the memo there. And then also there's actually now the abandonment of former land grabs, which were taken maybe for food production at industrial scale. They've now exhausted those places and they're handing it over, they're selling it to financial speculation. So again, they degrade it until it doesn't produce much food, and then they sell it to turn it into things like carbon sequestration. So big plantations, for example, that again, don't grow food. The second area that the report talks about is green grabbing. And I've already mentioned some of these. So there's colonial conservation and land sparing kind of approaches to conservation that say farming and conservation can't happen together, which of course, those of us here would probably know they can, and they do. The 30 by 30 target in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework cements in this logic, this colonial logic, that humans should be separate from nature, and we should lock up 30% of farmland, or not farmland, sorry, land away from humans, because there's an assumption that we're always bad for nature instead of being part of nature. carbon and biodiversity markets I already mentioned, or so-called natural capital. One of the chapters of my thesis is now published as an article in a journal. It's called What's Natural About Capital. If you want to learn more about the problems of offsets and environmental markets. The so-called nature-based solutions, you will have seen that particularly in UN kind of nomenclature, but mostly that's code for environmental markets, so biodiversity and carbon markets. Not, it sounds good, right? Why wouldn't you want a solution based in nature? But it's code for more green grabbing. And then the last one is biofuels and green energy projects. And that's an increasing concern around green energy projects, not only because of like the diminishing access to critical mineral resources and the impact of those extractive industries in the places where they're taking place, but because of the installations of large-scale renewables in ways that are not sympathetic with the landscapes where they are. And I'm not saying I'm afraid of wind generators. I'm talking about massive solar farms in places that actually could be growing lots of food, and possibly in collaboration with solar for that matter, but not being done in those more sensitive ways. Some of those other the other expansion and encroachment activities the report talks about is mining in particular. 14% of large-scale land deals in the last 10 years were for purchases for mining. So like that's a huge swath of large land loss from food production. Mega developments like dams. I actually saw one example of this in Borneo last month, the Bakun Dam. I recommend you have a look. They flooded a valley and displaced 9,000 Dayak or indigenous peoples and took them from where they used to live in traditional longhouses in communities of 30 to 60 families in a longhouse, and then kind of put them all into these so-called villages and make them live in a completely different way and in far more greater numbers than they ever have, with like one little medical clinic for this entire community, this newly forced to be community. And that was in the name of getting energy to Peninsular Malaysia, which they're not actually going ahead with now. So they've got this oversupply of energy which was basically to make the Korean company who built it a bunch of money to the benefit of nobody locally. The other one around this is environmental laws that are protecting polluters, which I think we see a lot more of in Australia. We see protesters going to jail instead of the people who are in the polluting industries. And urbanization and gentrification of rural land, I think, is another one that's super relevant in Australia. And if anyone has followed us here at John I Farms, our battle to build a micro abattoir, you will have seen that gentrification along the other side of our road is why we went to VCAT, because the lifestyle of neighbors who'd been here 2 years took us to VCAT. The good news is we won, but we shouldn't have to fight against people who just arrived, who bought a property for $2.7 million and don't want a little abattoir on the property across the road because they don't understand farming. Farmers shouldn't have to fight those things. So I think that's one that is probably more familiar. And the last area is food system reconfiguration. Contract farming, which has been like really common in things like dairy and the industrial pork industry and chicken industry for a long time, is increasing across the globe, actually. As we lose access to critical infrastructure, farmers are forced to produce for those who control the processing infrastructure instead of being able to maintain the autonomy of farmers who can process and distribute our own food. That leads to not only systemic economic precarity for these farmers, but it also contributes to the more capital-intensive farming and more use of agrochemicals to service your role as a contract farmer, where you no longer have the autonomy to say, well, I don't want to use chemicals in my farming. And those technocentric kind of capital-intensive farming and consolidation that's aided by digitization kind of round out the swath of reasons why we're losing access to land. And one of the things the report talks about too is that sometimes we maintain access to land, but it's so degraded that it's the equivalent of the land having been taken out of production. As we know, First People, smallholders, and local communities are fighting back, however. And they're doing that in a variety of ways. So some are, there's land occupations taking place. I strongly recommend that you have a look at the MST, which is the Landless Peoples Movement in Brazil. They're the biggest food sovereignty movement in the world, and they occupy land as communities. They do training together to move into land being land banked by big corporations. And then some have been there for decades, taking over this land and farming it together. They've also lost their lives trying to defend that land that they've occupied. They also have a particular legislation that says land left vacant for a period of time can be taken like that by the community. So land occupation in this country, it's a lot harder to hold on to as soon as the authorities come and try to tell you to go. Land sharing is probably much more common in this country in terms of the increase of farmers choosing to share our land. Like Josh, who's here, we share land here on Jara country. And I know, Bridie, you were sharing land. I don't know if you're still in land sharing where you are now. Yeah, so that's particularly that relationship between market gardeners and livestock farmers with a bit more land is a really good opportunity for these kind of things, or landholders are no longer using their land for farming. So there's lots of models for how that's going forward. And then the last ways that communities are fighting back is through advocating for policy reform around things like land sharing, or AFSA's embarking on a bigger piece of research around what would agrarian reform for land redistribution look like in a country like Australia. Like, it would be a bit different to Zimbabwe or Venezuela, I suspect, but maybe there's a way forward to actually try and change the way land is distributed and stop letting it be sold off to corporate and foreign interests. But we're doing all of this in the face of, serious insecurity around tenure, economics, and politics. So I'll finish with the last kind of points about ways forward, which relate to things we're doing here, but others that we should think more imaginatively about what we could do. And one of those is democratic spatial planning. In the People's Food Plan, which we updated last year, there's actually a case study on in France, Safer. I'm sure Antoine will tell me I'm saying that wrong. But it's like a community-based, but government-supported, I think, way of communities having a say in what happens to land when it goes up for sale in their district. And so they get to say, well, is this a legitimate... Actually, I'll just quickly backtrack. I'm sure in that question of gentrification and the land being sold off to people who aren't going to farm it, most people here would be aware that there's an absolute industry of planners who will write bogus farm plans so that those people can get a permit to build a house on farmland, and then they never farm it because they were never going to farm it. And in shires like ours, it's literally an industry. At a town hall meeting, somebody recently said they could count at least 10 planners who are writing those kind of farm plans for here in Hepburnshire. And if we had something like they have in France, Safer, then communities could be the ones who assess the farm plans and go, nope, that's another one of those bullshit ones, and just say, no, you can't, they can't do that. So some sort of democratic planning would be amazing. And that could relate to also accountable land agencies. So community managed land systems that put protection of ecosystems and food production, together, because that's what local communities actually do and have done for millennia. Another is to phase out market mechanisms for carbon removal, because that stuff around green grabbing is getting really serious. And so advocating against, in fact, there was an article in The Guardian I just saw just before the session started that something like 30% of the land that's been slated for biodiversity protection under the nature repair market, I guess, I didn't read the whole article, I had to come here, has actually seen a degradation in that land. It's actually in worse condition than when they locked it up for it. So that's pretty damning. I'll actually try to find that link once others are talking and share it. Another is caps on farmland investment. So in our shire as well, there's a really wonderful organization called Grounded, run by Carl Fitzgerald. He does stuff on community land trusts, and he is promoting a cap and trade approach to the problem of short-term rentals like Airbnb, because we have a massive housing shortage like so many areas do now in Australia and elsewhere. And so caps on farmland investment are another policy approach to say, you can't just take that much. You've got to leave some for the community to still be able to grow food and actually have schools and hospitals and all the things that come when you have a community. And finally, systemic structural support for small-scale farmers. And that can come in the form of subsidies, pensions, insurance, provision of infrastructure, like I said, so we don't lose access to all the processing infrastructure, A UBI, universal basic income, is something that AFSA advocates for. It's in the People's Food Plan as one of our kind of fundamental things that would address the issues of hunger in this country. Is that so obviously there's, for farmers, that's one thing, but just for everyone in Australia, if we had a UBI, everyone would be able to afford nutritious and ecologically sound food. So it's kind of a base of where we could start with addressing some of these concerns. So I've talked much longer than I like to in these sessions, but I think there was useful things in the report that I just wanted to get out as quickly and not make you all have to read the 87 pages of the report unless you really want to. The questions I want to put to all of you are, so AFSA would like to collect these, I guess, stories to use in our lobbying exercises, and also in our sharing knowledge amongst each other of how could these land sharing examples work, and what other ideas do people have. So the questions are, what examples do you have of corporate and or foreign ownership where you live, and has the community been able to mobilize about it in any way? Or if not, what would you need, do you think, to do that? And the second question is going to be around examples of resistance, such as grassroots land sharing or occupations, collective lobbying that you might be doing with other groups at the local or state level. So I'm going to open it up now to all of you to answer any of those questions. I'm going to take a drink of water, and Jess shared that link. Does anyone have examples of basically land grabbing in your area by either corporate purchases or foreign purchases, or ones maybe they're not in your area, but you're really familiar with the story? Because I think collecting these, it's huge in Australia, actually. We have a really serious problem with increasing foreign investment in our land and our infrastructure.
I have an example of a sort of a community solution, not on land that I currently work on a regenerative farm, not for profit, down near Bridie. But it's like a sort of an arrangement in Drysdale and the Ballerine Peninsula, and it's just a landholder who wanted sort of exchange of produce, so has allowed 3 tenants on there, which is Birdland Seeds, Ballerine Organic Farm, and Ballerine Fungi. So it's a mushroom grower, a market gardener, and I don't know if people are familiar with Birdland Seeds already. So I've been out there a few times because I just think it's really interesting how they've kind of just had a sort of a peppercorn lease, and it's in exchange for produce.
Fantastic. That's a great example. Thank you. We'll maybe make contact with them to do a little case study to include in the newsletter. It's great to see more of those things happening. Bridie, I don't know if you want to say anything about your land sharing agreement, since it looks like this is great news. Nobody has any corporations buying food near you, buying land near you. I think that's awesome.
I wouldn't be confident in saying that that's not happening. I guess I just feel like I didn't have much to contribute, in the sense that I don't think our situation with our farm is all that what's the word, special. I mean, it is special, but it's a very it's just a lease. We're just leasing a bit of acreage off a family's farm, and the farm is 60 acres, and they run sheep for lamb production, and it's tiny. It's not their production's tiny, and it's not their sole source of income. They're like local business owners, and we sort of found that land just because they were customers of ours from when we were at Ravens Creek, that was a really interesting situation there. But that actually, when we were leasing off Ravens Creek Farm, Hayden Finlay and his family, it was less ideal because they needed to charge us a lease amount that was that they sort of said was the going rate in terms of what that land value was, being pretty much residential land, even though it was farmland, and then also what that piece of land was valued at if it was taken out of Hayden's pastured pork and laying hens operation.
Yep.
So at the end of the day, that it was unaffordable really in the long term. Yeah, the interesting point I would make about our lease arrangement is how tenuous it is, I guess, and that weighs heavily on our minds from time to time because there was no formal lease agreement made up, just a memorandum of understanding, and it's just through a peppercorn lease sort of style as well. And we're very aware of the land not being ours, and farming within a place that you can see around you desperately needs attention and an attempt to regenerate and conserve. Well, regenerate really, because we're surrounded by just poorly grazed cattle farm, a beef and poorly grazed lamb, where it's just a hobby. And we've been finding that really difficult of late. We're trying to do as much regeneration on our 3 acres or two acres that we can, including like native hedgerows and bordering the land. But it's frustrating because there isn't any further we can go because we don't have a say on the rest of the property, and you never know at the end of the day, like next week they could pull the pin on us really. Even though we definitely don't think that would happen, but stranger things have happened. I don't know how relevant that is to the whole
I think it's
report.
super relevant. I think it's one of the things we know in the growing movement for land sharing. We know that there's a lot of insecurity in the arrangements. You know, even I wrote about it in the thesis, and Josh maybe could speak to it too. Like we've offered, you know, indefinite security, but it's a same thing. It's an agreement between us, and I mean, we're in very good relations, so I don't think that Josh is worried, but it's not the same as owning a title or having some kind of hard and fast rights to something. So even in the best situations, which I think we're probably one of the examples of, I feel that insecurity, and we've seen other ones that have fallen over and very quickly, and that's, I think, something we've got to work on to strengthen people's security of tenure for sure. And it's actually the landholders, the ones who hold the title, I think, are the ones we need to do the work on, and help us all understand that we belong to land, not the other way around. And we should take our guidance from that land, not from our own desires. And we shouldn't just value land financially. That's the wrong way of thinking about land entirely. But it's like a big amount of work to do after generations of capitalism, right? So
yeah, that's probably what we're finding the most difficult at the moment, is just, even though we have a very close relationship with the landowners, it just boggles the mind how little they seem to care for their tiny little parcel, which is absolutely beautiful and could be made even more beautiful, and we're so lucky to be farming on that land.
Yeah.
But seemingly so little, like willful ignorance maybe, or just basic ignorance, which I don't believe is the case. So it'd be so great to be able to influence other influence the landowners and owners around them and us to really understand what it means to take care of the land, and that we are stewards of it.
Yeah.
We don't own it really. Yeah. We're stewards of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's about that being in relations, right? And, you know, Auntie Mary Graham talks about you can't be in good relations with each other if you're not in good relations with country. And maybe more of those really relational gatherings, like the Deep Winter one, which is a national one, but maybe local ones of those where they could come along as well to a smaller gathering of locals to have that conversation together. Would like in your example, do you think they'd come along to something like that?
I actually haven't thought about that, and we have started doing a little local growers gathering. We've had 2 now, trying to do it sort of within the 2 major growing seasons. Down here, I'm not sure. I'm not too sure. They're relatively conservative, but also not. Tom and I just need to pluck up the courage and start having conversations like this with them, and that has been our plan for this winter. Everything seems to need to happen in winter.
It's because you're a market gardener.
Yeah. So yeah, we need to start having those conversations for sure, and that's a great idea. We could definitely offer them that invitation.
Yeah, I'm super happy to have a chat about that offline, about like what it might look like too.
Cool. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah,
That'd be
anytime.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tammi.
And I can see, I think Simon has something here. Yeah, WA is quite a place, isn't it?
Hi, Tammi.
Yep.
I'm very new. It's my first visit here. I live in the northern rivers of New South Wales, up on the Clarence. I met a young lady today, Peter.
Ah, that's
I
right.
think
Peter said that you were going to maybe come along. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a great chat. And so, yeah, she sent me this link, and yeah, they invited me to jump on board. So I'm here.
Welcome. Fantastic.
Our situation, no doubt, geographically different to you guys. I'm assuming that most of you guys in Victoria, am I correct?
Not necessarily. No, you've got people from, it looks like certainly New South Wales and Victoria, and is anyone?
Okay.
Sorry,
But
Amy.
anyway, it's not overly important. It's just great to see a good spread of people coming together. And look, I'm a 4th generation grazier, so I've been on the land for a while. And, but I see a serious situation occurring with our ag land, even up here, where they're losing out to development in every area. Like, you only have a certain amount of your prime ag land, and certainly like the Clarence is a massive floodplain, and it's some of the most fertile soils that you'll find around. Our region, from north at the Tweed and south to the Kempsey-Taree region, is a nursery for the livestock industry, which in times of extreme dry and drought on the western divisions, where everybody sort of has to destock or totally destock, we come to the rescue, or they come to us to restock their properties from this region. So without the protection of this land here, there won't be a nursery.
Yeah.
So everyone else west of the ranges and south, like we used to send train loads of weaner cattle down into Victoria out of this region. But a lot of those bigger farms have now been busted up. Some are productive, some are not productive, some are just going to rack and ruin. We're under threat now from development. People have found this area up here a nice place to live. They escaped COVID out of the cities, and they've had bush. Can't blame them for doing that. But we are now under threat with the solar farms. A lot of our area has been earmarked and targeted for solar farms. It's just going, like, okay, there needs to be, I'm not against solar, but I feel really sick in the gut, because it always falls back on us blokes on the land to service the needs of those that are wanting to wanting that service. And we're here to provide food. We make food, we grow food, and we look after people, we look after our animals, and we look after our land. So like it's not just here in the Clarence. It's in neighbouring areas, straight up onto the New England. That's massive solar farms going in, huge wind farms, and that land taken over by these big companies for renewables. Look, yes, it's an issue. I understand that they're trying to address the climate change situation, whether you agree or not. But anyway, it's an invasion of our area, and we have because we're such a small number, we're an easy target. We don't have numbers of voice. I just don't know how you do it. I really don't know. We're just too easy to pick off,
Yeah. Well, it really demonstrates the importance of collectivizing, doesn't it? And doing that beyond those of you left, because I know the Northern Rivers has been, one of the, for all the reasons you just outlined, you've been through it, the hardest example of loss of farmers and loss of farmland. It's happening really quickly up there now.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of our committee members is Adele Wessel. She's at Southern Cross Uni. She's a food historian there, and she actually has done heaps of work with the the old dairy sector up there, which I know has also been dwindling rapidly. But we could, through Peter especially, I can make sure we might put you in touch with her, because she knows all of these different kind of farmers in your region who are talking about these things, but might not be talking to each other necessarily. So AFSA might be able to help with the collectivization process, and then see how our work around the legal guide that we're working on to help people deal with the planning problems, and help us see what the kind of case volume then tells us we need to advocate for for changes to policy that would actually protect that farmland. So I'll make sure, we'll be in touch after this for sure, Jeffrey, and I'm so glad that you came along.
Yeah, thank you. I've got to thank Peter for that. Hopefully, we'll see a little bit more of her, and be able to sit down and talk about her ideas and thoughts on doing a veggie garden, veggie market, and that.
You're very fortunate if you get a bit more of Peter. We miss her already, and she only just left a few days ago.
Is that right? Okay. Well, she's straight into action. There's no doubt about her.
That's how she is.
Yeah,
we talked about her today, actually, Pete. I can see you. We talked about her today with the chilblains. She suffered the worst chilblains I've ever seen of anyone, because she's from up there, and because it's freezing here, and she just puts gloves on and carries on. It's like,
she didn't have any war wounds on her when I saw her, so she was going great.
She's extraordinary.
Here she is. She's on.
Great, better. No, I can see Adam's actually got his hand up though, so I might just.
No, I'll stand by. That's fine.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeffrey. Good to meet you.
Oh yeah, g'day. Look, I was just going to share similar thoughts to Jeffrey. I'm in Lismore, northern New South Wales, and there's lots of horticultural production, macadamia farms. So I expect there's some corporate control of them. But really, the pressures are in the Northern Rivers is housing and tourism, and that's been particularly exacerbated after the floods, with a whole lot of our populations living on the floodplain, and governments looking desperately to find new places for housing, which is predominantly prime agricultural land. And so we've seen the loss of that over the years, and now with New South Wales government agri-tourism reforms, there's increased competition in terms of using agricultural land for, sometimes I say the playground of the rich, for Airbnbs, for breweries, for, sort of farm entertainment purposes, which are incidental to farming, but it puts those pressures to make, farming unviable. And so, with the whole flooding of the Northern Rivers, we're seeing a whole lot of housing being brought back on the floodplain, and there are ideas that some of that land could be acquired and be used for farming purposes, but it's developing models and making it viable that it's worth it. It's hard enough getting volunteers in terms of community gardens or getting urban agricultural urban agriculture projects going, let alone trying to, make, small lot holdings on the floodplain viable for people without, the capital or the means required. So, yeah, those are the challenges here. And that's something that we're trying to address. And you'll know the likes of Joel Orchard, who is in the past has pursued kind of models for share farming. But a lot of that comes down to who bears the risk and the liability, and the capital costs involved, and the uncertain land tenure that comes with those sort of models.
Yeah, that's really helpful context as well, Adam. Thank you. And you're right, it's very much aligned with what Jeffrey was saying. And I know that region up there suffers exactly the same problems my region does, even though I don't know why they all want to come here. It's very cold here compared with where you are, so it's kind of strange, but it's the same issue of those sort of land pressures and government selling it out from under us, basically. We're fighting one here locally where they're talking about rezoning 14 hectares of prime agricultural land on the edge of Dalesford to open it up for residential development to deal with a projected potential future housing shortage, while we have 40% housing vacancy on any given night because of the number of short-term rentals in town. It's disgraceful. So we've launched a huge campaign here in our region against that proposal, which I have some hope that will win. But what this is making me think about is, AFSA, one of the things we do as an organization is we run kind of campaigns, and often they're state-based because of the nature of what we're fighting for. But I think a land campaign, protecting agricultural land campaign would be a really, really excellent national campaign where we can look at some of those policy levers that are allowing this constant buying up of farmland for inappropriate developments, whether it's playgrounds of the rich, or whether it's plantations for financial investment for biosecurity markets, whatever it is, they're all bad. And so I feel like what I'm already hearing is that we have a campaign growing to protect our land from these things, because it's getting much, much worse. It's escalating. That's why the EPES food report came out, because it's actually escalating everywhere. And policymakers seem to have a very confused idea about what to do about it. Our rural strategy in this shire, at the same time that they talk about taking up 14 hectares of agricultural land, they talk about protecting agricultural land in the agricultural part of the strategy. It's like, these are not the same. Taking it away and telling us you're protecting it are not the same. So pointing them out shouldn't have to be everybody's job. We can make it a national job instead of an individual one. Are there others who have stories to share? And I mean, Simone, I'm interested to see Lock the Gate here. It's always good to see allies across the movements. And I saw your comment there about you do have a lot of plantations and fracking and all manner of things over in WA, don't you? You also have something you might be able to tell us about, though. I heard just recently about how we keep hearing in the news about the we need gas. We're going to need more gas exploration because we're all going to run out of gas. And which is, as people here probably know, a total lie. And we export the vast majority of what is extracted. But in WA, you have, I forget what it's called, but it's like a domestic reserve.
Oh, domestic gas policy. Yeah. So we're meant to keep 15% of the gas for WA, and some projects I think do reach that and others don't, like they still don't reserve that much, but yeah, there's really no shortage. And we do use a bit more gas than other states for industrial purposes and electricity, but less for heating. But residential use is so small anyway, compared to how much they even use just to turn it into LNG to ship it overseas. Like that amount of gas is more than all households, and I think even maybe industrial use. So yeah, it's madness. But yeah, there's actually not fracking at the moment in WA. We've managed to hold it back for years, though it's getting closer up north in the Kimberley, like it is in the Northern Territory, where it's a little bit further ahead. Yeah, so far it's not. We've managed to stop it in other areas, but yeah. Yeah,
I still think that domestic use policy is an interesting one.
Yeah, it's better than not.
Because in arguably the most neoliberal state in Australia, you have that. And so
and our gas prices are
like a policy precedent that could be built on in a better, more impactful way than what that one is.
Yes. And it's actually under current review. There's definitely some companies fighting it because they want to be able to export from some areas as well. Yeah, but we'll see. I don't think it's going to happen. But yeah, even our prices are going up because, yeah, we're still linked to quite a lot to the export market as well. But anyway, we're running out of conventional gas, so it's definitely time to transition. We'll end up with using fracked gas otherwise.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that'll be something, actually, we'll be contacting you about the Nileni process coming up soon. So it's a global process towards the next food sovereignty gathering in India. There've been 2 of them so far in 2007 and 2015. And this one is very explicitly intersectional. So reaching out to not just food sovereignty organizations, but feminist and anti-racist and anti-mining and all of the different groups that are fighting for a livable future for all of us. So we'll be inviting you guys along to some things over the next year.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks for your work.
Ooh.
And Jared, I saw that you shared some things there, as you always do. Jared's been doing wonderful work for longer than probably most of us here. And I've opened the tab, but of course I'm not going to read it while we're in the session, about what you guys have written about land sharing and land stewardship, I think, wasn't it, Jared?
Oh yeah, it's just I've got an AHA page on my website, and one of them is I call it the thinking stump, where I used to drive up the hill, and there's this little stump is only about 2 or 3 inch diameter, and I used to think I should knock it over and clean it up. I was always too lazy because it was too steep, and I just didn't do it. And for years it just straggled there. And then one day I was going up there and I saw a superb fairy wren sitting on the tip of it, and I immediately thought to myself, "You arrogant bastard." I suddenly realised that you don't own anything. I had another realisation when I was sawing a echidna. I said, do I own the echidna? No. Do I own the ants that it's eating? Do I own the log that the ants are on? And when you start thinking about those things, then the concept of ownership and stewardship really crystallise in your mind.
It's such a good point, and could be a really good opener to discussions with landholders who are land sharing, to think about our relationship with the land that we're on, whatever the titles mean.
I
under
wanted to go land share. I wanted to get involved in land sharing for 20 years, but the biggest problem we have is water. And our farm is so uneconomically viable that anything that makes money, I need to do. And so we started trying to have a market garden, and my wife used to, she'd spend $1,000 on seed and she'd propagate everything, and I'd turn around and say, no water, it doesn't rain, and so everything get wasted. So that's a bit of an issue, I think.
Yeah, I mean, access to water for sure, and it's going to continue to be a bigger issue as climate change continues. So those questions about how we share those resources, especially when they're in scarcity in these land sharing agreements, is going to be an important one, I think. But I think that, yeah, regional discussions, like Brady, we were just saying, like regional chats with others. We did do one down in the Mornington Peninsula. Josh was there, and it was really enriching, I think, for everybody who participated in it, in terms of thinking about land sharing. And there were landholders there interested in the idea, but you got an idea of how far away people are from thinking about these things sometimes. When one said to me out of the session, we're interested in sharing our farm with some other young farmers, but I'm just worried, like, would we have to see them very often? And like, what if they had friends over and they left rubbish on the farm? And I just went, I think you're pretty far from thinking about sharing your land right now. If that's your starting point, you might want to have some young people you're already in some good relations with to start this conversation, rather than some idea of sharing land that you don't actually want people to have freedom to care for. I
think what naturally comes out of this too is succession planning, because that's one way of sharing. We wanted to basically give the farm to a young couple that couldn't afford a farm, but that's not going to happen, because I'm seeing that those people don't They're too hard to find. I won't say they don't exist. They're too hard to find. We need someone that will run the farm as if it's their own, and they can have all the profits, and they just pay us a pension. I don't call it a lease. I just pension, because how much money do you really need if you're still living on the farm and we're off grid and you got all your food. We've got a winery, so we've got we've got all that stuff. You don't need much money, and so you could set out for a young couple and really set them up. And that sounds very good until you run through the scenario of what happens in a drought when you have to work off farm. I've worked off farm. I've only just stopped working off farm. Now the young people that are going to run the farm, they'll have to work off farm. Does that mean they've got to get it through their head that all that income goes back into the farm? That's not going to happen. There's going to be a split between what they think is theirs working off farm and what's the farm. So I don't know what the answer is there.
Yeah, I don't either. But I think there's, again, like there's just bigger movement work to be done, right? In terms of people understanding their place in their relationship with the land that they're caring for, the how you just have to do what you have to do to survive sometimes. I remember when we started up here, I figured, well, worst case scenario, if I needed extra income in those first years trying to turn over a profit, I could always go work at the bookshop. I don't know why I thought that. It's fun. I've never worked in a bookshop. I've read a lot of books, but and bookshops pay terribly. But I was just like, maybe that would be what I'd do. Fortunately, I didn't need to do that. But yeah, I think understanding those things comes into the early conversations, right? What are you going to do if there's a drought and there's no water for a year or two, or 10? Because that's also happened. So.
Yeah.
Thanks, Simone, for that comment there too. I've just clicked that link, so I'm really interested in. We have community-owned energy here in Hepburn Shire too. It started as Hepburn Wind, and it's now Hepburn Energy. Yeah, so it's a really wonderful. It was the first community energy project in Australia, I think, and so we know all of these things are possible, of course. Although reading today, there's an article. I'll just show you an article somebody shared with me today that. It's not going to make you happy, but I'll just share it anyway. The Balancing Act in Indonesia about protecting their critical mineral resources from exploitation by others and trying to keep that in balance with, the national interest and the world's interest around what happens with mineral extraction. And Indonesia is not exactly the most democratic place either. So anyway, you'll find that one interesting, Simone. Amy.
Hey guys. I don't grow food, but I just was wondering if you guys had experiences or have heard stories. So the taking of land for where people would grow food is obviously super important, but also just thinking about the infrastructure that might help transport the food, and whether there's been like local hubs that have maybe faced a similar experience around, corporations then buying up land / property that local growers have been using as a distribution base, and how this comes into the topic.
Like in relation to things like Southern Harvest doing that up there, or?
I guess there's probably like local distribution hubs in various places, and yeah, that would be a good example, Tammi. Like if something happened to the land where Southern Harvest operates, that removes that resource from local growers. So just as much as stripping land from people where they physically grow the food, but also taking away their possibility to get that stuff to market locally. But maybe that's not something that people have experienced.
Yeah, have people lost access to some sort of food hub distribution in an area? Or, our butcher shop here is operated as a kind of informal hub for a really long time for all the other livestock farmers. And it's not at risk of being taken away because we're livestock farmers and we own this. So that takes away that level of precarity of relying on those who don't have the same dependence on it to have your infrastructure there. It's part of why we went down the path of the abattoir here rather than on leased land, again, to reduce the precarity of the situation. And actually, I think Amy's seen it, but for others, another chapter of my PhD, which is also an article, is called The Intrinsic Infrastructure of Agroecology. And it's also published in Agriculture and Human Values. And it talks about these things, about the processing and distribution infrastructure and the importance of them, the role of the state, and the role of collectivizing to work with the state or against the state to make sure they happen. Because that's actually, the land squeeze is sort of it's the big global problem right now, but so is the infrastructure squeeze. It's really, really grim in terms of the ability to process or distribute your food, what options there are for people to do that. It's getting worse and worse.
Tammi, can I just jump in again? I hear you talking about an abattoir.
Mm-hmm.
I've had in my mind for quite some time the real need, because we've actually lost an abattoir at in Grafton, and everything is being processed at casino. Like it is a co-op over there.
Yeah.
Which I'm a beef producer, but I've also invested in butcher shops as well. It's a means to survive. I'm primarily a beef producer. Some people think I'm a butcher, but I'm not actually. I just own the butcher shops as a means to make the payments. But I see a great need for a micro processing facility, a multi-species processing facility in our regional communities. And I'm banging this drum for a while, and I know in Victoria there's already some mobile abattoirs that being set up and functioning, and I'd really love to sort of try and catch up with some of those people and just to have a look at what they've got, because for our regional communities to survive and to maintain that supply of food, continual supply of food, we have to be able to process it. It doesn't matter what it is, we've got to process it and make it so it's in a consumable product. And if you want to grow an area and utilize it, because a lot of the farms are all being broken up into small lots, people are looking at ways. They're asking me, how can we, what can we run in our 100 acres on our 40 hectare block? At the moment, we've got a huge demand for goat. That's we've seen that market grow, and there's a shortage of goats. And I say, well, if you want to clean up your block, get some goats. But there's a big cost on infrastructure to build a secure fence. But the other side of it is having them processed. So we just need a domestic facility that will process from a spatchcock to a peacock, from a vealer right through. Like everything.
Yeah. So
if you've got a processing facility, you'll get.
I was going to say, Peter can fill you in some more on, and we can send you some information. AFSA's been spearheading the movement around the loss of processing facilities for like 7-8 years at least. And we are forming Meat Collectives Australia as a kind of, it's just really a name for people with these problems around the country to gather under. And then form local meat collectives with the support of those of us who are already doing that. So we're doing it literally here on our farm with a handful of other small scale farmers locally. And we're sharing all of our documentation on our website for free, and would like to see more people do this. And one of the things I also should flag, I see it's 7:30 as well, but AFSA is going to be running an agroecology roadshow up the East Coast, starting here in Victoria, going through New South Wales and up to southern Queensland. And the roadshow is going to talk about these things like the meat collectives. It's going to talk about the importance of working collectively to solve these problems, because nobody's going to solve it for us. And it's going to actually talk about things like, we've been talking about Bridie, like the kind of subjectivities of the landholders and what Jared's talking about, like we don't own the echidnas. Why do we own the land? So those ways of thinking about ourselves and our relations to land, each other, the people we feed, and the infrastructure. So that article that Jess posted there, the intrinsic infrastructure of agroecology, talks about how these things, like you say about a micro abattoir, Jeffrey, they're not a link in a chain, and since they got turned into a link in a chain, you break that link and the whole system breaks. It's no longer a chain, right? That's why I call it intrinsic, because I think it's part of the metabolism of our farms. And when you break a piece of the metabolism, then we get sick. And that's what's going on. So we need to be working together to rebuild healthy metabolisms for our farms and our communities. And we need to do that very much together and in a spirit of collaboration, not competition. So AFSA is definitely here for that conversation about microprocessing facilities, whether it's for meat or grains or dairy or anything. But yeah, right now we're working on meat collectives, but we're super interested in supporting all of these kind of collaborations going forward. So in October, you'll see a merry tribe of gypsy food sovereignty activists coming up the East Coast to talk agroecology and neoliberalism till you're sick of it. No, you will never get sick of it. You'll love it.
I'll look forward to that. Look forward to it. That'll be great.
Yeah, so we're about to do outreach on where we're going to stop. But Northern Rivers is already on the list. So we'll definitely be seeing you and Adam up there. And Peter. Can't wait to see Peter again already. But yeah, the meat collective conversation is huge. So Jess will send you an email to make sure you're looped into we're going to have a meat collectives discussion sometime this month. I don't think we've scheduled it yet, but like a Zoom like this, that's just for those who are already engaged with the meat collectives discussion and others who'd like to be. So she'll make sure you've got an invitation to join that discussion so you can see where we're at with the development of the campaign and the projects. There's several projects around Australia already at either beginning stage or pretty well developed.
All right, look forward to it. Thank you very much. And thanks Peter, for the invite, and we'll see more of each other.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks so much to everyone for coming, and thanks so much to Jess, who always sits there quietly behind the AFSA logo and does all of the hard work for all of us every day. And yeah, there she's put a link. If anyone wants to join the Meat Collective, just email Jess. And yeah, I already look forward to the next one of these too, where we start talking about the agrarian trust stuff. But I'm super excited about the idea of a serious campaign around land, because, you know, I'll tell you a quick story. One of the Indonesian leaders of the peasants organization there, Zainal, tells a story that when they started work on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, which was ratified in 2019, when they started that work a decade earlier, one of the lawyers said to them, to get the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, it took 17 years. And so, this isn't going to happen quickly. Are you sure? And he always says, yeah, no, we do know. So we'd better start now. And that's how I think I feel about the land reform campaign. Like, it's going to take a really long time to get land reform in this country. So we'd better start now. So thanks to everyone for coming. If you're not already a member of AFSA, you certainly should be joining, so we can keep up doing what we do. And I look forward to seeing more of you at the next one when we talk about the Agrarian Trust. And Bridie, yes. Yes, I would love you to come along and ask those questions, and we'll make sure and get down your way too. Ben's been trying to lure me down there for a visit anyway, so hopefully I'll get down there soon. All right, everyone, thank you very much. Have a lovely night, and go and have some dinner if you haven't already.